as you can see, the harvest has taken place, at least in this area. And you might think that this is the worst kind of habitat that you could visit just to find a few insects, but you can find insects in this particular environment and habitat. You won't find lots of insects, but you'll find some that you might not find on any glorious nature reserve. I like little scruffy corners like this, and quite frankly, I think I fit in quite well with one. But they really are fabulous little places to spend half an hour, get close to the ground and see what's crawling around. But there are some quite nice flowers as well, flowers that somehow manage to survive in what seems an inhospitable environment such as this. They will have withstood a number of sprays. Also, the very dry conditions. It's absolutely bone dry here at Ekrin, and over the last few weeks we've been rather surreptitiously lured, I think, into a dry period. And it's a dry period that people don't realise that we've actually been in for a while. But when you think back, at least in this part of Nottinghamshire, we've not had any decent rain for weeks. We had a little bit the other night, which just dampened the ground, but that's about it, and it wasn't of any use. And this soil here is just like a dust. But there are some plants that really do well in these scruffy, weedy corners. That's why it's very important that farmers leave either strips of ground or those little weedy corners of fields for nature. And here at Ekrin, that's exactly what is done. If you wander around the edge of any cornfields or arable fields, and there are areas of bare soil where it's been left uncultivated, even after the harvest has been collected in, chances are you might find both of these. You might find numbers of recently hatched 7-spot ladybirds, Coccinella septempunctata, wandering around looking for aphids. The other little beauty that you might see is the beautiful red flower of Scarlet Pimpel, Anagallis arvensis, if I remember right. It's an absolute beauty of a flower. Just look at the simplicity of that. And in a cornfield setting like this, it really does look at its best. And it can survive in the driest and seemingly harshest of environments. It doesn't need much, does this little plant, but it does bring joy every time I see it. At least I love it. I think it's a beautiful little flower, and the colour of the petals is quite unusual from what I've seen of both Nottinghamshire and UK flora. It's a beautiful little thing. It's not one of those little flowers that you'll see lots of. You'll never see them en masse. It tends to be isolated plants such as this one here. It doesn't make a great amount of growth, and I presume that it's an annual, but it's a terrific little thing. Beautiful flowers to brighten up even the relative dullness and barrenness of a cultivated field. It does occur sometimes on waste ground, growing out of the hardest possible soil that you could imagine. Always a delight, and it's fairly obvious where the name Scarlet Pimpel is derived from, although you would call this more of an orange really than a true red. To me, it's certainly a long way from being anywhere near scarlet, but it's just a beautiful little flower, and it's just so nice to see after the harvest has been gathered in. It's well worth looking at if you've never seen this plant. It is found pretty much everywhere, but it's an absolute little joy. Simplicity at its very best. When you look closely, you'll find that corners of field, this sort of dry, inhospitable habitat, is abundant with plants. Not the most wonderful plants. We've got scentless mayweed here, which is the daisy-like flower, and of course poppy. There's lots of groundsel here and various willow herbs and creeping thistles, and of course there's the remains of crops too. The more you look, the more you see with these type of habitats, and I do like to try and visit sites like this. A number of beetles will be found scurrying across the ground, and a range of bugs too. Always worth looking for species. Some species are quite specific to this type of habitat. A closer inspection will often reveal the more unusual. And here's a ladybird that I've not showed you before on this channel, and in truth it's a ladybird I've not seen very much of for the last few years, but this is an Adonis Ladybird. It's a species which really increased a number of years ago in Nottinghamshire. It was described as being quite uncommon at one time, but it certainly became more widespread. But it appears as though, based on my observations, that it has become more rare, or at least far more uncommon, and it's unusual for me to see one. Perhaps I don't visit this kind of dry habitat enough, but it's a lovely little ladybird, has a wide worldwide range, and is even found in Australia. So this is nice to see. I'm very pleased to see this, because I haven't recorded this species much in the last 3 or 4 years, to be honest. But this is just the kind of habitat to find it in. And if you look carefully enough, you may well find one of these in your little weedy corner of your local field. This is a field grasshopper, beautifully camouflaged amongst the remains of the crop here. Not very often you get the opportunity to get close enough to film one of these, or even take a photograph. They can be really skittish, and you can be chasing one for yards and yards till you eventually give up, or it goes into cover. This one's going to struggle for cover here, but it does allow us to see what impressively built insects these are. Those huge hind legs there, which are tremendously good, obviously, at allowing this insect to jump. And they do a lot of this, tuck themselves in against something, and that camouflage, as you can see, still works brilliantly. And if need be, this grasshopper can up and off. They initially jump at first and then fly the rest, so they can cover large distances in single goes. Nice to finally get some shots of one of these. Here's a plant that has escaped me for a number of years. I don't know why. It's common enough, but it's one of those plants that you just walk by and never think about, and yet it has 2 lovely names. I think they're both absolute crackers. The first one, the so-called common name, is shepherd's purse, presumably named after these delightful little seat cases here. But the scientific name is altogether wonderful, at least I think it is, and it's Capsella bursa pastoris. What a fabulous name that is! And it is 3 names. It's not the bursa pastoris isn't one name. This is a very common annual weed of gardens, cultivated areas, and it's one of the first plants that comes through. Tiny little white flowers on it, and the further down the stem you go, the larger the seed cases or the shepherd's purses get. It's a very, in a way, indistinctive plant. I don't think it's declined. If you was to dig an area of your garden now and leave it and see what comes through, 9 times out of 10 this plant will be one of those that does. But there's just the one plant here, and it's the only one I've seen actually in all of the area that I've covered making this video, and it's suddenly reminded me. It's funny how sometimes you can go for months or years without seeing a plant or a species, and then all of a sudden something twigs a reminder, and you think to yourself, do you know, it's years since I've seen that. But an insignificant little annual plant with two beautiful names. I've just been walking along the field edge here, and there are some half cut down creeping thistle plants, and as you can see, something's been attacking and eating the leaves of the creeping thistle, and I can show you exactly what's caused this characteristic feeding damage in a second. And here it is, rather two stages of the same beetle here. The beetle is the tortoise beetle, Cassida rubiginosa, which is the commonest of the Cassida tortoise beetles we have here in the UK, and it's the one that you're most likely to go out now and find. At the side of it is the fantastic pupa. The larvae, the souls, are quite similar and fabulous things, and the characteristically shaped tortoise beetles come out of those and are in a range of colours too, but this is sometimes referred to as the green tortoise beetle, though there are several green tortoise beetles that we have. This one is extremely fresh, and I would imagine it's only been out of the pupa here for a few hours, and that's why it's still sat at the side of the pupa. Amazing things. You can, at the front end, which is down to the left, you can more or less just make out the eyes. Those two little black dots right at the front end. These are marvellous things, and the only way you can see the actual beetle itself really is by turning it upside down. Quite remarkable, very well protected, very flat to the leaf surface, these beetles, and that offers a lot of protection, and the pronotum of these beetles becomes almost a hood. This one is still quite translucent, with it being teneral. Teneral refers to an insect which has not long been hatched out and hasn't attained the full coloration or the complete hardening of the exoskeleton. I do like tortoise beetles. There's some very nice species that you can find. Cassida vibex is a nice one. Basic green like this, but then with a Y-shaped sort of darker pattern across it. Marvellous little things. And the same, there are a number of adult tortoise beetles here on this creeping thistle. Just goes to show you that you don't need superb nature reserves and great habitat all the time in order to find a range of species. And there are rarities to be found in little scruffy corners of field, certainly county rarities, and species that you probably wouldn't find at any glorious nature reserve, no matter how good it is. But it's nice, I like it especially, to record these lesser recorded areas. How many of you have gone into the corner of a weedy field, sat down and just seen what you could find and record? And the emphasis, of course, being on recording. It's very important that we record what we see and what we find. But you can have a very enjoyable half an hour, quarter of an hour, or an hour even, spent just looking around, grubbing around underneath what few plants there are, like this scentless mayweed here on these scruffy agricultural corners. I'm glad that there is greater emphasis placed now on farmers to leave such areas, and I know Jim here at Ekrin is very, very keen on that, and it's a great job that he does too. I've recorded some nice things on these scruffy, neglected corners. It's nice that they are left. Some farmers certainly do make an effort to protect the wildlife that is on their fields and on their land. They're not all bad. So, next time you're wandering around the countryside, stop and have a look at some little weedy, scruffy corner of a field. You never know, you might find me lying in it.